What if you could understand anyone on the planet? I mean, anyone. A tourist in Tokyo, a scientist in Antarctica, a tribal elder deep in the Amazon. Sounds like a utopia, right? A world free of misunderstandings, translation-fueled conflicts, or language barriers. But every utopia has its dark side. Today, we're embarking on a massive thought experiment to explore 50 consequences of a world where everyone speaks the same language. We'll cover the obvious benefits and the completely unexpected, even terrifying downsides. Stick with us to the end, and you might just realise why the legend of the Tower of Babel wasn't a curse, but perhaps the greatest blessing humanity ever received. And before we dive in, drop a comment below. What language would you choose to be the one global language? We're curious to see what you think. The idea of a single universal language is as old as time itself. Most religions and mythologies tell of a time when all of humanity was one people, sharing one common tongue. The most famous example, of course, is the story of the Tower of Babel. Speaking one language, humanity united to build a tower that would reach the heavens, an act of hubris that angered God. He shattered their common language, causing them to no longer understand one another. And just like that, the great construction ceased. But the dream of universal understanding never died. In the late 19th century, constructed languages began to appear, with Esperanto becoming the most famous. Its creator, Ludwig de Zamenhof, believed a common language could bring an end to wars and conflict. However, neither Esperanto nor any other similar project ever achieved mainstream adoption. Today, English serves as the global lingua franca, but it's not the native tongue for the vast majority of the world's population. In our thought experiment, however, we're imagining something different. A world where all 8 billion people speak the very same language, right from birth. So what would happen then? Let's find out. So here's the first and most obvious benefit. Instant understanding while travelling. Imagine it. You're no longer that helpless tourist, desperately gesturing and pointing your way through a menu or a map. You can arrive in any country, any city, or even the most remote village, and chat with the locals as easily as you would with your next-door neighbour. You can do more than just ask for directions. You can hear an old man's life story as he sits on a park bench. You can haggle with a market vendor over the quality of their goods. You can understand the punchline of a street performer's joke. This isn't just about convenience. It's about completely erasing the barrier between us and them. Travel transforms from mere sightseeing into a deep human connection. It becomes a true immersion into another way of life, one that suddenly feels completely understandable and incredibly close. But this blessing comes at a dreadful price. And here we face the first great cost, the mass extinction of cultures. A language is not just a tool for communication, it is a living archive, the very soul of a people. Woven into its grammar, its idioms and its proverbs is a 1,000-year history, a unique lens through which to see the world. When a language dies, so does everything associated with it. The legends, the songs, the stories passed down from one generation to the next. All of it will simply vanish. We don't just lose words, we lose entire universes. Humanity risks becoming a giant supermarket with the same identical products lining every shelf. Yes, everything will be clear and accessible, but the world will become unbearably dull, flat and predictable, stripped of its most precious asset, diversity. But let's turn to the positives. The third point is the incredible acceleration of scientific progress. Today, science is global, but it's still held back by language barriers. Researchers have to spend precious time and resources translating foreign papers, books, and reports. There's always the risk of misinterpretation or delays in getting vital information. In a world with a single language, this problem would disappear. Imagine, a brilliant physicist in India publishes a breakthrough paper, and in that same instant, her colleagues at CERN, NASA, and the University of Tokyo can read and understand it. This would trigger an immediate global brainstorm. Discoveries that used to take years could be made in months, or maybe even weeks. Cures for diseases new energy sources, the exploration of space. All of this would become our reality so much faster. The flip side, however, is the impoverishment of our thinking, as unique concepts begin to vanish. Many languages have words with no direct equivalent, words that reflect specific cultural or philosophical ideas. Take the Portuguese word saudade, a bittersweet longing for something that is gone, or the German Schadenfreude, the joy one feels at another's misfortune, or the Japanese concept of wabi-sabi, finding beauty in imperfection. These words aren't just labels, they are tools for thought that allow us to grasp the subtlest nuances of emotions and experiences. In a single, homogenized language, there may simply be no room for such complex ideas. Our inner world, our emotional palette, would grow poorer, as if a painter were suddenly robbed of half their colours. The fifth point is an undeniable positive, a revolution in education. Imagine a world where anyone with an internet connection can learn from the greatest minds on the planet. A student in a small African village could listen to a live lecture from a Nobel laureate at Cambridge. A high schooler in Siberia could join a virtual biology class taught by a professor in Australia. Every textbook, scientific paper, and educational course would become accessible to absolutely everyone. This would lead to an unprecedented rise in the overall level of knowledge across the globe. Talented individuals from the poorest, most remote corners of the world would have the chance to fulfill their potential, benefiting all of humanity. Education would truly become an engine for social mobility. But here we run into a serious cognitive trap. Point 6. The homogenization of thought. The theory of linguistic relativity suggests that the language's structure shapes the way we think and perceive reality. For example, some languages don't have a clear distinction between future and present tenses, and their speakers may perceive the very concept of time differently. In others, having a multitude of words for snow or rain makes people more attuned to the subtle variations in these phenomena. A single global language would impose a uniform cognitive model on everyone, one solitary way of structuring thought. We would all begin to think more alike, which could stifle creativity, hinder our ability to find unconventional solutions, and ultimately lead to intellectual stagnation. A seventh advantage would be the simplification of international diplomacy. How many conflicts and wars throughout history have been sparked by a simple mistranslation or an ambiguous phrase in a treaty? Consider the famous Potsdam Declaration of 1945. When the Japanese Prime Minister used the word mokusatsu, it could be interpreted as either no comment for now or we reject it with contempt. The United States opted for the second meaning, a choice that helped precipitate the atomic bombing. In a world with a single language, such tragic misunderstandings could be eliminated. Negotiations would become more honest and transparent. Diplomats could speak directly to one another without the filter of an interpreter, fostering greater trust and accelerating the path to compromise. It might very well be a world with far fewer wars. However, this peace will come at the cost of jobs. The eighth point is the death of entire professions. Translators, interpreters, tour guides, localization specialists, foreign language teachers, and linguists who study modern languages, all of them will find themselves out of work. We are talking about millions of highly skilled professionals across the globe. The economic shock from the collapse of such a massive industry will be colossal. Of course, these people will eventually find new careers, but the transition will be incredibly painful. It will be a period of mass unemployment, requiring widespread retraining on a scale we've never seen before. This represents a severe blow to the stability of the global economy, but the ninth point brings us something incredible, a truly global pop culture. No more waiting for months, or even years, for your favourite TV show to be dubbed, or a best-selling novel to be translated. A new album from a Korean band, a new film by a French director, a new novel from a Brazilian author, all of it will be instantly accessible to the entire world on the day of its release. This will create a single, global cultural space where ideas and trends travel at lightning speed. Musicians, filmmakers and authors will gain access to an audience of 8 billion people, sparking an incredible renaissance in arts and entertainment. Creative boundaries will be erased forever. But we won't just be burying pop culture. We'll be losing something far more subtle. This brings us to the 10th downside, the death of linguistic humour. Humour is one of the most complex and fragile parts of any culture, and it's deeply intertwined with language. Puns, wordplay, allusions, jokes that hinge on a word's double meaning or on two words that sound alike. All of this is simply untranslatable. Just try explaining to a foreigner why an English limerick is funny. In a world with a single language, this entire dimension of human wit would simply cease to exist. Humour would become more universal, yes, but also more primitive and direct, based on situations rather than on clever language. We would lose one of the most elegant forms of intellectual entertainment. And number 11, the huge economic advantage for businesses. Just think about the vast amounts of money, time and manpower companies now spend to adapt their products for different markets, translating websites, manuals and ad campaigns, localizing software, hiring multilingual staff. Globally, this costs billions, if not trillions of dollars. In a world with a single language, all of these expenses would simply vanish. A company could release one product with one advertising campaign for the entire world all at once. The savings could be poured back into research, lower prices, or better pay for employees. This would provide a massive boost to the global economy. But this raises the most difficult and dangerous question of all, the inevitable conflict over choosing a single universal language. Which one would it be? English, Mandarin, Spanish, or perhaps the constructed language Esperanto? Any choice would be a political one. The nation whose language is adopted would gain unprecedented cultural, economic and political power. All of the world's literature, science and media would be conducted in their native tongue. Every other culture would be forced to abandon its heritage, sparking a profound sense of humiliation and injustice. The very attempt to impose a single language could ignite global wars, mass protests, and separatist movements. It would become the most widespread and bitter conflict in all of human history. So, let's imagine this universal language has been chosen and successfully implemented. This brings us to another huge benefit. Migration and integration would become vastly simpler. Right now, the language barrier is one of the biggest challenges facing migrants. It prevents them from finding a good job, getting an education, making new friends, or simply feeling like a part of their new community. In a world with one language, that problem would vanish. Anyone could move to any country and immediately become part of its life. This would dramatically increase global mobility. People could relocate to wherever their skills are most in demand, or even just to a place where they love the climate. The result would be a more efficient distribution of human talent across the globe, leading to widespread cultural enrichment for everyone. And this is where the terrifying danger lies. The downside: total control and propaganda. A single universal language is a dictator's ultimate dream. Just imagine how much easier it would be to manipulate public opinion if all news, all media, and all social networks were in one language. There would be no alternative sources of information in other languages to offer a different perspective. A single, official truth could be crafted and broadcast to 8 billion people. Centralized censorship would become all-powerful. Any form of dissent could be nipped in the bud. This is a direct path to a global, Orwellian dystopia, where Big Brother is, quite literally, watching everyone. But on the bright side, this would lead to a massive leap in global security. The effectiveness of emergency services would skyrocket. Picture a major earthquake or a tsunami. Today, international rescue teams lose precious hours trying to coordinate their efforts through interpreters. In a world with a single shared language, rescuers from Japan, medics from Germany, and engineers from Russia could communicate directly, instantly, and flawlessly. The same holds true for combating pandemics, global terrorism, or industrial disasters. Seamless understanding at every level, from strategic command to the first responders on the ground, would save thousands, if not millions, of lives. Humanity would become far more resilient to any global threat. However, we could all become a little less sharp. A major drawback would be losing the cognitive advantages of bilingualism. A wealth of research shows that learning and using multiple languages is a fantastic workout for the brain. Bilingual people tend to be better at multitasking and often show more developed abstract thinking and creativity. They're also more skilled at concentrating and filtering out irrelevant information. What's more, in people who speak multiple languages, the onset of symptoms for dementia, like Alzheimer's disease, appears on average 4 to 5 years later. In a monolingual world, humanity would lose this powerful and natural form of brain fitness, which could have long-term negative consequences for our collective intelligence. Imagine a single global job market. Right now, a talented programmer from Vietnam or a brilliant designer from Argentina might miss out on their dream job with an international company simply because their English skills aren't strong enough. In a world with a universal language, professional ability would be the only thing that matters when hiring. This would create truly global and fair competition. Companies could recruit the best talent from anywhere in the world, while workers could choose from opportunities offered by any employer on the planet. This would lead to a surge in productivity, higher quality goods and services, and ultimately a better life for everyone. However, this kind of interconnected world has its vulnerabilities. A major one is the disappearance of natural codes. Throughout the history of warfare, rare languages have served as a powerful tool for secure communication. The most famous example is the Navajo code talkers of the US Army during World War II. Their language was so complex and unique that Japanese cryptographers were simply unable to crack it, a fact that saved thousands of soldiers' lives. In a world with a single, universal language, that option is gone. Of course, mathematical encryption will still exist, but we would lose this unique, completely secure, and virtually unbreakable method of protecting our communications, a method gifted to us by the sheer diversity of human cultures. This would leave military and intelligence communications far more vulnerable. 19. Plus radically simplifies technology for everyone. Have you ever bought a new gadget only to find the interface or the instructions are in a language you can't read, or downloaded an app that didn't support your language? In a world with one universal language, all of that becomes a thing of the past. Every device, every app, every website, no matter where in the world it's created, will be universally understood by default. This will make technology more accessible than ever, especially for older adults and people in regions that currently lack quality localization. The digital divide caused by language barriers will be completely erased. Harnessing the power of technology will be simpler than ever before. And yet, the world would be a far less beautiful place. The aesthetic loss would be immense. Every language has its own unique music, rhythm, and sound. The melody of Italian, the lilting tones of French, the crisp precision of German, the guttural sounds of Arabic, all of it weaves the unique auditory tapestry of our planet. This diversity inspires poets and musicians alike. In a world with a single language, we would only ever hear one melody. It would be like composing music with a single instrument, or painting with a single colour. Our world would become acoustically monotonous. We would lose a source of profound aesthetic pleasure, one that right now we simply take for granted. One of the great promises of our time is the potential for stronger global unity. Psychologists point out that we subconsciously trust people more when they speak our language without an accent. We see them as one of us. A universal language could help us overcome this tribal mindset, allowing us to recognize ourselves as a single species, humanity. When tragedy strikes in a distant land, it would be far easier to empathize with those affected. We would hear their stories in our own language without the filter of translation. This could lead to a decrease in xenophobia, racism, and nationalism. Perhaps then, we could finally begin to tackle global challenges together as one human family. But let's not be naive. The downside is the emergence of new forms of social hierarchy. The old language barriers will fall, only to be replaced by new ones based on dialect and style. Inevitably, a proper, high-status version of the language will arise, the language of the media, of government, and of big business. And alongside it will exist the improper regional dialects and the common ways of speaking. People will no longer be judged by their nationality, but by how cleanly and correctly they talk. This will become the new indicator of social status. A new kind of linguistic snobbery will be born. Instead of uniting people, a universal language could simply build new walls between us, more subtle perhaps, but no less real. Another major benefit is for the global economy, as doing business internationally would become effortless. Right now, closing a cross-border deal is a complex process. It requires teams of lawyers and translators to meticulously review every single word in contracts, navigating different languages to avoid any chance of misinterpretation. In a world with a universal language, all of this would be a thing of the past. Negotiations, marketing, legal support, logistics, every step would become vastly faster, cheaper, and more reliable. A small company in Portugal could seamlessly sign a contract with a corporate giant in Korea. This would create a truly free and efficient global market. But at what cost to art? This would spell the end for great poetry and theatre. The works of Shakespeare, Pushkin, Dante, and Goethe are so much more than just stories. Their genius lies in the mastery of their native tongues, the rhythm, the rhyme, the alliteration, the metaphors. It is virtually impossible to translate poetry without sacrificing its very soul. In a world with a single language, these masterpieces would become hollow shells. We could read a plot summary, but we would never experience their true magic and beauty. They would become artifacts of a bygone era, like ancient hieroglyphs, their meaning understood by only a handful of scholars. It would be an irreplaceable loss for all of human culture. Another major benefit would be the introduction of universal global standards. This would apply to everything from technical regulations and medical protocols to legal codes and traffic laws. Currently, language barriers and translation errors often cause confusion, which can lead to serious consequences, ranging from the failure of expensive equipment to critical medical mistakes. A single shared language would allow us to create a universal system of standards that everyone can understand. This would make our world safer, more predictable, and better organised. For instance, a pilot from any airline could seamlessly understand instructions from air traffic control at any airport in the world, which would dramatically improve air travel safety. However, this would pose a significant challenge for historians, complicating our entire understanding of the past. To truly grasp the mindset of people from a different era, a historian must read documents in their original language. That's because language is a direct reflection of the mentality and the thought processes of its time. In a world where everyone speaks a single language, ancient tongues would become even more distant and alien. The ability to immerse yourself in the world of ancient Rome by reading Cicero in the original, or to understand the soul of medieval Japan through its poetry, would become a skill reserved for a select few. We would risk severing the deep, intuitive connection to our own past, reducing it to a collection of dry facts rather than the living, breathing story that it is. Another major advantage is the power to solve global problems together. Consider the monumental challenges we face: climate change, resource depletion, ocean exploration. Tackling these issues requires a coordinated effort from all of humanity. As it stands, international conferences and summits often devolve into dialogues where everyone is talking past each other, bogged down by language barriers and cultural divides. In a world with a single, shared language, scientists, engineers, politicians, and community leaders from every continent could sit at the same table and communicate directly. This would allow us to forge a common strategy far more quickly and make the effective decisions on which the very survival of our species depends. But for so many, this would be a personal tragedy, inflicting profound psychological trauma. Our mother tongue is more than just a skill. It's part of our very identity. It's our mother's voice, the first words we ever spoke. It's the language we think in, dream in, and pray in. Forcing millions to abandon their native language for some universal standard would be seen as a betrayal of their roots, their family, and their people. This could trigger widespread depression, a crisis of identity, and a devastating sense of loss. To be stripped of your native tongue is to have a piece of your very soul torn away. The 29th advantage is the total elimination of linguistic discrimination. Today, people are often judged by their accent. It can cost you a job opportunity, make you a target for ridicule, or cause others to treat you with condescension. An accent instantly labels a person as an outsider. In a world where everyone speaks the same language from birth, this problem would simply cease to exist. Of course, people would still have regional dialects, but there would be no concept of a right or wrong way to speak. Individuals would be judged on their words and actions, not on how they sound. This would lead to a much more just and tolerant society. However, there is a risk of stagnation. A significant downside is that the language's evolution would slow down. Languages are constantly changing and developing, and one of the main drivers of this growth is contact with other languages. This contact leads to the borrowing of words, grammatical structures, and ideas, making the language richer and more flexible. A single global language, with no neighbours to interact with, would risk becoming stagnant. Deprived of external stimuli, it would evolve far more slowly. Over time, it could become less expressive and struggle to adapt to new realities, technologies, and social phenomena. It's like an isolated ecosystem that gradually becomes impoverished. A universal language would dramatically simplify international justice. Institutions like the International Criminal Court in The Hague face enormous hurdles because of language barriers. Trials involving judges, prosecutors, defence attorneys, and witnesses from dozens of different nations require a colossal effort in translation. This not only slows the entire process down, but also increases the risk of a miscarriage of justice. In a world with a single shared language, bringing war criminals and international terrorists to justice would be far faster, more efficient, and fundamentally more fair. The law could operate seamlessly across borders, with no time wasted on translation. We also risk losing the diversity of our narrative traditions. The 30-second drawback: the structure of a language shapes how we tell stories. Some languages are direct, to the point. Others rely on allusion and allegory. Some cultures prize brevity, while others cherish ornate, complex sentences. These distinctions have given rise to unique literary and folk traditions all across the globe. A universal language would most likely lead to the dominance of one, supposedly most efficient model of storytelling. We risk losing other ways to tell our stories, and with them, other ways of understanding the world and ourselves. A major benefit would be a golden age of international creative collaboration. Picture a film set, a director from Mexico, a cinematographer from Sweden, an actor from Nigeria, and a composer from Japan, all working together seamlessly. Or imagine a band with members from 5 different continents. A common language would tear down every barrier to this kind of joint creativity. This could spark the birth of entirely new, hybrid genres in art, music, film, and theatre, fusing the very best elements of diverse cultures. It would be an era of unprecedented creative experiments and collaborations. Then there's the everyday yet surprisingly complex issue of names. What would happen to the millions of personal names from all the world's languages? How would names like Juan, Svetlana, or Wei sound in this new tongue? And what about geographical names? How would you adapt Paris, Moscow, or Buenos Aires? If you try to standardize them, you sever the deep historical and cultural connections they carry. But if you leave them as they are, they stick out as foreign, difficult to pronounce words. It might seem like a trivial detail, but it's actually a vital part of our heritage, a part that we could lose with shocking ease. Imagine the birth of a single global literature. Right now, we experience international authors through translation, and even the most brilliant translation is still just an interpretation. In a world with a universal language, a writer from anywhere on the planet could speak directly to an audience of 8 billion. A global literary conversation would emerge, where ideas and stories circulate freely, without middlemen. We could read African novels, Scandinavian thrillers, and Latin American magical realism, all in their original form. This would profoundly enrich our experience as readers and create a literature that is truly universal. However, this would be a literature without roots, and that leads to another devastating loss: the death of folklore. Folk tales, myths, legends, proverbs, and epic poems. They are the very essence of a people's wisdom and culture. They are inextricably tied to the language in which they were born. Their unique humour, their poetry, their profound meaning. So much is lost in translation. As these native languages disappear, this vast body of oral tradition will simply die out. We might save the plots as dry summaries, but we will lose their living soul. Humanity will become like a person who has lost all memory of their childhood. Another key advantage lies in the military sphere, specifically in simplifying coordination within international coalitions. Today's conflicts and peacekeeping operations frequently involve military forces from multiple countries. The language barrier between soldiers and officers from these different armies is a critical issue. It can lead to tragic mistakes, including incidents of so-called friendly fire. A common language for all the world's armed forces would dramatically improve the effectiveness and safety of joint operations. Orders would be understood with absolute clarity and executed more swiftly. In a combat scenario, this could save countless lives. However, this unity has a dark side, a heightened vulnerability to information attacks. Imagine cybercriminals or propagandists crafting a viral idea, a phishing message, or a piece of fake news. In a world with a single language, this weapon becomes universal. It could be spread across the entire planet in a matter of hours, and it would be equally effective on people in any country. Right now, our linguistic diversity serves as a kind of firewall, slowing the spread of dangerous information. In a monolingual world, that defense would be gone. A single successful information attack could trigger global panic or chaos. The coming years will see the rise of truly global online communities, people brought together by shared passions, whether it's video games, cultivating rare plants, astronomy, or historical reenactments, will connect without any barriers. Forums, chat rooms, and social networks will become genuinely worldwide. Imagine discussing the latest episode of your favourite show with fellow fans from New Zealand, Brazil, and Egypt, all in a single conversation. This will forge stronger, more authentic bonds between people, built on what they truly love, not on their geography or nationality. The virtual world is about to become more vibrant and engaging than ever before, but this would lead to a total monopoly on information. Think about it. If all the world's content, news, movies, books, and blogs were created in just one language, it would become drastically easier to control. A handful of giant media corporations or governments could dictate what all 8 billion people read, watch, and discuss. Alternative viewpoints and independent media would find it nearly impossible to be heard. Right now, if the media is censored in one country, we can still learn the truth from sources in other languages. In a single language world, that safeguard is gone. This is a direct threat to freedom of speech. 41st Plus is about making history accessible to everyone. Imagine if every major historical document, from the Code of Hammurabi to the Diary of Anne Frank, was translated into a single, universally understood language and made available online. Any student, or anyone with a curious mind, could engage directly with the primary sources without needing to spend years learning ancient languages. This would make history more approachable, vivid, and personal. Perhaps this could finally help us learn from the mistakes of the past and avoid repeating them. History would no longer be a subject for a select few, but a shared heritage for all. However, the transition process itself would be a complete disaster. Adopting a single universal language wouldn't happen overnight. It would take decades, perhaps even a century, and throughout this entire period we would see the emergence of a lost generation. The elderly, unable to master the new tongue, would find themselves completely isolated, incapable of communicating even with their own grandchildren. Children, speaking only the new language, would be cut off from the cultural heritage of their ancestors. This would sever the bonds between generations, leading to countless family tragedies and a profound sense of loneliness for millions. The price for this future unity may simply be too high to pay. Another major advantage is increased transparency in global politics. As it stands, we hear speeches from world leaders at the UN or other international forums through the filter of an interpreter. That interpreter, whether intentionally or not, can soften or even distort the speaker's original message. In a world with a single common language, every person on the planet could listen to politicians directly, without any middlemen. This would hold them far more accountable for their words. Lies and demagoguery would become much more obvious. Citizens could better monitor their leaders, which in turn would make global politics more honest and democratic. Let's return to the subject of art. The 44th drawback is the devaluation of our existing cultural heritage. What would become of the vast libraries, film collections, and theatrical archives in languages that have vanished? Yes, they could be translated, but as we've already mentioned, it would only be a pale imitation. Cervantes, Don Quixote, Tolstoy's War and Peace, the films of Fellini, the songs of Edith Piaf, all of these would lose so much of their magic. They would become mere exhibits in a museum of dead languages. Future generations would know of them, but they would never be able to truly experience and love them. A vast portion of the greatest achievements of the human spirit would be, in effect, lost forever. Here's another benefit, and while it might not be a world changer, it's a really pleasant one. An end to confusing instructions and manuals. How many times have you struggled to assemble furniture using directions that were obviously run through a machine translator? Or tried to figure out how a new home appliance works? In a world with a single language, the instructions for any product, no matter where it was made, would be perfectly clear. This would save us a ton of time and frustration and prevent countless household mishaps and minor injuries. The simple things in life would finally be simple. But behind this apparent simplicity lies a serious problem, an ecological one, if you will. This problem is the loss of what we call linguistic biodiversity. The disappearance of languages can be compared to the destruction of rainforests. Every time a plant or animal species goes extinct, a unique set of genetic material is lost forever. In the same way, every language that dies takes with it a unique way of thinking, a unique way of perceiving the world. Preserving linguistic diversity is as vital to the health of humanity as preserving biodiversity is to the health of our planet. By letting it vanish, we make our shared noosphere, the collective sphere of human intellect, far poorer and more fragile. Our 47th point is one that professionals in the IT field will especially appreciate: streamlining the software development process. Granted, programming languages themselves are universal and largely based on English, but the vast ecosystem of supporting documentation, tutorials on forums where developers find solutions exists in dozens of different languages. This creates a significant barrier for developers from non-English speaking countries. A single common language would make all these resources accessible to everyone. This would accelerate learning, the sharing of knowledge, and collaboration on complex projects. The global IT community would become far more unified and effective. But even if we did achieve unity, it would be fleeting. Language is a living thing. It's constantly evolving and splintering across the different regions of the world, each with its own climate, culture, and history. That single language would inevitably start to take on its own unique character. New slang would appear, new dialects would form, new accents would emerge. At first, these differences would be subtle, but after a few centuries, these dialects would drift so far apart that their speakers could no longer understand each other. Humanity would find itself right back at square one, a world filled with countless different languages. The cycle of Babel would simply repeat itself. And the final drawback hits on something very personal: the loss of a space for mystery. Language isn't just a tool for being understood by everyone. It's also a way to create your own private world. This could be the family slang that only your loved ones get. It could be the secret language of lovers. It could be the professional jargon that separates the experts from the outsiders. This creates a sense of belonging to your own special group. In a world of total clarity, This intimacy, this chance to have your own secret garden, could disappear. Everything becomes shared, public, transparent, and sometimes a person just needs to be misunderstood. And the 50th and final point, which brings it all to a conclusion. The greatest benefit, the one that ties all the others together, is the potential for genuine unity. If we can overcome all the challenges and dangers, a single language could become the foundation for a new global civilization. A civilization where wars born of misunderstanding no longer exist, where science and art are shared by everyone, where people see themselves not as citizens of separate countries, but as citizens of planet Earth. This is a dream held by many philosophers and humanists, and although the path to it is difficult, the very possibility of such a future is a powerful and inspiring argument in its favour. So after weighing all the pros and cons, what's the bottom line? A world with a single language would be incredibly efficient, technologically advanced, and perhaps even safer. Science and business would take a giant leap forward, but this efficiency would come at a terrible cost. We would lose thousands of cultures, unique ways of thinking, and entire worlds of art and history. Humanity would become like a perfectly functioning but soulless machine. Perhaps our linguistic diversity isn't a barrier, but our greatest defense against uniformity and total control. It's a system of checks and balances that makes our world complex, but in return keeps it vibrant and unpredictable. Language is more than just a tool for communication. It's the home where our soul resides, and evicting billions of people from that home for the sake of a questionable utopia. Well, that might not be the best idea. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. I hope it gave you something to think about. Subscribe so you don't miss our next thought experiment, and be sure to hit that like button. And for the main question, let me know in the comments. If we all woke up tomorrow in a world with just one language, what do you think we would lose first, and what would we gain? I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts.